Hebrews 10 verse 35, which says, "Cast not away therefore your confidence, which hath great recompense of reward." When the writer of Hebrews wrote this verse, the believers that he was writing to were suffering. And they had been making a declaration of faith for years and years and years. In fact, when you read the whole chapter, Hebrews chapter 10, you found they had lost a lot of their goods. Many of them had lost their homes. And yet for all of those years, decades, they maintained a good confession. God's going to bless us. God's going to restore us. God is a good God. And they just kept confessing and confessing and confessing. And finally, after waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and maybe you know what I'm talking about. Have you ever waited and waited for something to happen? They begin to get so tired of waiting that they begin to think, you know what? If we had never made this confession of faith, we could have just moved on with our life. But no, we had to stake a claim and say this is what God was going to do, and now we've just been waiting all these years, nothing's happened. And they had become so disillusioned and so tired of waiting that now they were thinking about just chucking the whole thing. So the writer of Hebrews writes to them and says, "Cast not away." Cast not away is the Greek word apobalo. Apo means away. The word balo means to throw something like a ball or a rock. It means to chuck it, to throw it, to discard it, to get rid of it. It really is the idea that this thing is bothering us. I don't want it in my life anymore. I'm just going to get rid of it. And one of the best illustrations of this is in Mark chapter 10, verse 50, where the Bible tells us about blind Bartimaeus. And the Bible tells us that when Jesus was coming into town, blind Bartimaeus wanted to get to Jesus. And he did an interesting thing. The Bible tells us that he took the garment that he was wrapped with and he threw it out of the way. To throw it out of the way is the same word, the word apobalo, which means that garment was restricting him. It was stopping him from getting where he wanted to go. It was in his way. It was a hindrance. So apobalo, he grabbed that thing, hurled it out of the way to get it out of his way so he could get where he wanted to go. Now that same idea is used in this verse in regard to a confession of faith. And the writer of Hebrews says, don't do that. Just because you're tired, just because you've been waiting and you're just exhausted with waiting, don't shuck your faith. Don't dispel it, don't discard it, don't get it out of your way. When you have the temptation to say, hey, if I wasn't doing this, I could have moved on with my life. I'm tired of this walk of faith. I'm just going to get rid of it. He says, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Cast not away, therefore, your confidence. And the word confidence is the word parousia. The word parousia describes that very bold, forthright kind of speech. This isn't somebody who's speaking very mealy-mouthed, but rather this is somebody that's making some kind of a bold declaration. And in fact, sometimes this word confidence, the word parousia, is used in a political context to describe a very bold political statement. But in this particular context, it's believers. And they're making a bold proclamation of their faith, except now they're just kind of tired of it all. And you know, when you get tired, you don't think right. When you get tired is when the devil comes and says, stop doing this. You've done this long enough. If God was going to do something, surely he would have done it by now. Why don't you just get rid of this? Why don't you just dispel it, discard it, get rid of it, reject it? I mean, maybe your prayer didn't come to pass, but at least if you stop this, then you can move on in another area of your life. The writer of Hebrews says, don't do it. You've invested too much for you to stop now. Cast not away, therefore, your confidence, he says, which has great recompense of reward. Maybe you haven't had the manifestation yet, but the manifestation is coming. And listen to how it could be interpreted. Don't discard, dispel, dismiss, dump, or cast off your bold declaration of faith, because it does have great recompense of reward. Pull yourself together, tell the devil to quit speaking to you, and keep making your bold confession of faith.